So today, of course, we're talking about downhill. We have 5 speakers. So I will introduce them in more details, obviously, later in the webinar. The speakers are Marlene Giandolini, ARASH KHASSETARASH, Wouter Hoekkamer, Marcel Lemire, and David Roach, who will give us his expert view as a coach. So 4 scientists and the coach, as we did last week, except that last week we had, or 2 weeks ago, we had only 4 speakers. So today will be a bit frustrating, probably for the speakers. I'm sure they have tons of things to say, but we asked them to do no more than 12 minutes so that we can save time for questions. So if you have questions, please ask your question in the chat. So we'll take a couple of questions after each presentation, and then we'll do a general discussion at the end after the 5 presentations. All right. So I think I'm not missing anything. Fred or Thibaut, if I'm missing anything, please let me know. If not, I think we can start. So unlike what we posted on Twitter, we have a small change. The first 2 speakers will be inverted. So ARASH, KHASSETARASH will start. So ARASH, if you want, since while I'm introducing you, you can share your screen. So about ARASH, I must say that I was super fortunate to co-supervise ARASH for his PhD with Brent Edward at the University of Calgary. He is now still in Calgary, but as a postdoctoral associate. ARASH's main research interests include biomechanics of running and fatigue. He has authored and co-authored 12 peer-reviewed journal publications, and he has practiced endurance running for over 10 years. And the title of his presentation today is "Running the Same Downhill Trail is Never the Same." So he will basically talk about the repeated bout effect. So if you want to share your screen, we can start.
Perfect. Can you see my screen now?
No.
Oh. So it's shared. Let me try it out. Same problem again. Can I go back and come again?
Yes, please do that. So thank you everyone again for being here. I can recognize some name, so I'm not going to cite anyone, but thank you for being with us. Okay, try again. Here we go. Perfect. Please, ARASH.
Great. So I'd like to start this presentation by wishing RBE for all of you. And I hope by the end of this presentation, you will be convinced that running the same downhill trail is never the same. Imagine that you've been out of the gym for a while, you've been inactive, and then you go back to gym and you do a set of squats, high reps, and then I ask you to rate your soreness from 0 to 10, 0 being nothing and 10 being extreme soreness, before and after the squat session and every 24 hours. What you will probably end up saying would be something like this, where there's some sensation of soreness after the squat, and then that sensation goes even more higher and peaks around 48 hours. and then start to subside after 3-4 days. And that is mostly due to muscle damage because of this eccentric nature of the exercise, the squats. Let's call that one week 1. And then you go home and you come back next week. And this time you're stronger. And you do the same squat session. And this time you would be less and less sore compared to the first time. And basically that is the repeated Bout effect when you get stronger after you do the first eccentric bout. There is less agreement about the cause and mediators of the repeated Bout effect. We know that it exists, and over the years, different mechanisms have been introduced, but there are different researchers talked about different mechanisms. For example, neural adaptation, that it says that the neuromuscular system, neural system becomes stronger after the first bout, or the muscle tendon unit becomes more stronger and then less damage occurs. And then, or maybe the inflammatory response is better, or the extracellular remodeling causes stronger extracellular system. So there are different mechanisms put forth as causes of this repeated Bout effect. But in the end, all of these factors work in concert or individually to produce this effect. We were specifically interested in looking at the repeated Bout effect in downhill running as a whole body exercise. As you know, downhill running is basically single leg squatting every step that you do, and then you do it more and more, and then the more prolonged it is, the more damage you incur to your muscles, and then muscle damage occurs. And if you do it the second time, you would get the repeated Bout effect. So we asked our participant to run 30 minutes on the treadmill downhill at a pretty steep slope of 11 degrees. And these 2 times downhill runs were 3 weeks apart. So the first one considered Bout 1 and the second one considered Bout 2. And we were specifically interested in the physiology and the running biomechanics of it. Then we measured the knee extensors or quads maximum force production on this chair, and we would consider the knee reduction as being related to neuromuscular fatigue. We measured this maximum voluntary contraction or maximum force production before and after the downhill run, and every day after the first and second downhill run. And what we found was a very, very large reduction in the maximum voluntary contraction, the force production capacity, and more importantly, it was persistent up until 3-4 days after the exercise. I didn't go back. The force production capacity didn't go back to the baseline even after 4 or 5 days. While we did the same thing for after the Bout 2, the second downhill run, and as you can see, the reduction was much less, and the recovery of that fatigue was much, much faster. And that was the entire neuromuscular response. We were also interested in figuring out if the neural adaptation occurs during this repeated Bout effect. For that, we measured the voluntary activation, where so the voluntary activation basically measures the capacity of neural system being able to deliver and being able to activate the muscle. So not the muscle itself, but the neural system. And any reduction in this voluntary activation would be considered as the neural deficit. As you can see, after the first bout, we found a very large reduction, up to 7% reduction after the downhill run, and this reduction was much less and almost non-existent after the second downhill run. Therefore, we concluded that the Bout 2, during the Bout 2, the runners were less fatigued, and that was partly, at least, due to more neural drive or better preserved neural drive. And then we were also interested in running biomechanics. As you can see here, we can basically measure the forces that the runner exerts on the ground, and then we get this graph like this on the right. And then by using that graph, we can calculate some measurements, that is, some variables that are related to running biomechanics. And I'm sure you've seen some of these variables, for example, on your watch or any device that you use to track your running. The first variable is the contact time, is the period when one foot is on the ground and when the force is basically above zero. And then when both feet are above the ground, then the force would be zero, and then that would be the flight time. And then we can also calculate the step frequency based on and off of this ground contact. Then we can think of leg as a pogo stick. And if the leg spring is more compliant, it would take it more time to coil and recoil, elongating the contact time. Or basically, the longer the contact time, the more compliant the leg spring. And this is interesting in specifically for runners, because it is quite related to running economy with these U-shapes, curves, that there is a specific self-selected contact time or equivalent self-selected leg stiffness. And if there's a deviation from this contact time or from this leg spring, leg stiffness, then the cost of running would go higher. And there's a good explanation for that, but I'm not going to go into too much detail of that one. So what we did, we tried to calculate this contact time and flight time during this 30-minute downhill run every 5 minutes. And what we found was quite interesting, because there was a huge increase in contact time during the first downhill run. And that increase, that's close to 9% increase. That is very much compared to, for example, if you think of like a 1 hour run, we know that if there is an increase in contact time during the 1 hour run, it wouldn't go above 1 to 2%. So 8%, 9% increase was quite high. And more interestingly is that this increase was accompanied or accomplished by reduction in flight time. In another way, if you think about it, the runner basically at the end of the run was not leaving the ground by much. And when we calculated the same variables for the second downhill run, what we found was that this increase was there, but this increase was much less compared to the first downhill run. And the same story for the flight time. And by that, we concluded that the Bout 1 was accomplished by spending more time on the ground when fatigued, while this increase was less during Bout 2. And then, as expected, we found that the leg stiffness was also dramatically reduced, as I explained with the relationship with the contact time and leg stiffness. And the energy absorption was quite the same. And this leg stiffness was quite preserved during the second downhill run. And another very interesting finding was that the second downhill run was accomplished by absorbing less energy. So the same 30-minute downhill run was accomplished by absorbing less energy. By that, we concluded that there was a better preserved leg stiffness during the bout 2, and the energy absorption was also less during bout 2. And it is quite interesting and important in terms of running, because it basically tells us that the runners would be able to continue running for a longer and longer time. So to sum up, we found that the strength loss or neuromuscular fatigue was less and during the second bout, and that was mostly due to better preserved neural drive. And also we found that the running biomechanics, as you saw that the downhill running biomechanic was completely modified at the end of the first downhill run, while during the second downhill run it was less and less modified, and that was mostly due to better preserved legs. And what it means basically that the runners were able to run more efficiently and were able to continue running for a longer time if the experiment continued. And the take-home messages are that I hope that I convinced you about the importance of previous exposure to downhill running and or eccentric leg muscles training before a race, specifically before the race, that includes long downhill running session. And also, I hope that I convinced you that the running the same trail will never be the same. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, ARASH. We already have a question for you, so maybe Arkady, you can open your mic if it works and ask your question. Okay, so if it doesn't work, maybe I will read it for you. So ARASH, the question is there a ceiling so number of sessions, level of the athletes to improve this repeated bout effect, or can it be better and better, although in less proportion, of course? So what do you think?
The answer would be that there should be a limit at the end to how much repeated bout effect you can get out of this training, 2, 3 times, 4 times, and eventually there should be a limit to that. And another thing is that it is also important to notice that this repeated bout effect would not last for long time. So if you do just one downhill run or twice downhill run and then go home and come back 9 months later, you wouldn't be expecting to have that repeated bout effect anymore.
So how long do you think it's, I know it's a tricky question and it's almost impossible to answer, but how long can you expect this repeated bout effect to last? We have data on upper limbs, much less in lower limbs, so it's difficult, but maybe you have an answer.
My understanding would be that actually we have some papers from the late 1980s that shows that this effect can last for up to 3 months. It definitely will be much less in 6 months. And these are I'm talking based on the data from, I'm sorry that I can't remember the author's name, unfortunately. I'll send it in the chat. But yes,
Ken Nozaka, right? Is it Ken Nozaka from Perth? Anyway, so.
they were also in that paper as well. Yes. So 6 months would be pretty much the time that you wouldn't expect any a repeated bout effect after that. And I see another question. Guy, can I go on and answer the questions, or are we?
Yeah. So okay. Maybe read the question and then answer it.
Yes.
From Roger Cram.
So the question is, can you clarify if you measured overall leg stiffness or was it just at the knee? The slide said knee stiffness, but the model looked like whole leg. Yes, we did measure. I tried to keep it as simple as possible. in this presentation, but we did actually measure the leg stiffness and the knee stiffness as well as ankle stiffness. And the interesting thing was that the knee stiffness was quite preserved after the second downhill run compared to the first one. So basically the preservation of the leg stiffness was mostly due to the preservation of the knee stiffness, which is quite, I would say it was, I would predict such a thing, given that the downhill running would mostly related to the quads than the plantar flexors.
Yeah. So we'll take the last question before we move to the next speaker. So it's about cadence. Any change in cadence between the two bouts?
That was very interesting thing to me. That I was expecting a change in cadence, and my result says there was no significant change in cadence. So there were like 1-2 steps per minute, but it's not statistically significant, so we can't really say that it was a change. So the step frequency or cadence was same from minute 1 to minute 30.
So what changed was the composition of the step frequency, so the duty cycle, contact,
yes,
and flight time, but the cadence itself stayed the same or similar.
Yes, that was quite similar to a type of running that is people started to talk about this grounded running, which is basically running with a less and less flight phase, and this transition was more close to that grounded running type at the end of the downhill run.
Okay, thank you very much, ARASH. Nice
Thank you.
presentation.
I'll stop sharing.
You can unshare, and so Marlene, I think you are ready. I will introduce you. So Marlene Giandolini, again, thanks for being with us, Marlene. So Marlene defended her PhD thesis in 2015 at the University of Saint-Etienne, where I am at the moment, on the management of mechanical stress and neuromuscular fatigue in trail running. And since then, she has been working for Salomon in the footwear department. Her research topics aim at better understanding the factors of performance as well as injuries in runners by investigating more particularly the role of footwear using clustering approaches to eventually develop the most optimal shoe for a given runner. And today, well, I don't need to read the title of the presentation. So I think we are going to switch from lab to field, but I'm not too sure. So Marlene, please.
Yeah, I hope so. So thank you for this nice introduction. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon. I don't know, depending where you are. So for the next, I hope 12 minutes, I'm going to try to demonstrate why downs are so important for performance in trail running. But before starting, because we are in trail running, so we must present this famous Mia's model of performance in trail running. So it has been presented during the first webinar on uphill running. So just as a reminder, performance in ultramarathon, it's much more complex than in road running, especially because of all the factors that the runners meet basically. And in particular, muscle and osteoarticular damage are of great importance in this context. From a more empirical standpoint, let's say, there is this very interesting survey that has been done 14 years ago in Chamonix on the big races of the Chamonix Valley, UTMB, CCC, and TDS. And basically what they have done is that they try to identify the main causes of dropouts in ultramarathons. And as you can see, what they observe is that, of course, there are gastrointestinal disorders, nausea, that are one of the main factors of dropouts in such races. But besides that, muscular and osteoarticular causes are a fairly high part in dropouts. So downs matter for performance. So I'm going to start with a very, very simple but very brilliant, from my perspective, study that have been done by Cyril Gendre and Thibault Luciana from France. And what they observe basically is that in English, its places can also be reason in downhill. And so to highlight this, they just recorded the average speed of the first 30 runners of the UTMB and the last 30 runners of the UTMB. What they observe is that actually during the first uphill, the relative speed of the first runners compared to the last runners were pretty much the same. It was around 80% of their average speed. During the last uphill sections, the decrease in the speed was regarding downhill. The relative average speed during the first downhill was pretty much similar between the first runners and the last runners. But what they observe is that the drop of speed during the last downhill section was much more important for the last runners, as you can see here. Sorry. So seconds downs matter for performance, and partly because of the large induced muscle damage, as ARASH just demonstrated just before. Here it's just a review of literature that we have done 5 years ago with Guillaume and Gianluca and many others authors, just to try to have an overview of the muscle fatigue induced by very different type of exercises. So here at the left you have a tour des géants, so almost 330 km/h with a pretty impressive positive elevation and negative elevation, of course. 2 UTMB, 150 km treadmill run, so level running. This has been done in Saint-Etienne as well. And a short trail, a single downhill run, a 6 km downhill run with this elevation of 1,300 meters. And a single uphill run. And as you can see here, if we look at some indicators of fatigue that have been recorded through neuromuscular evaluation, we can see that it's much more higher for the downhill exercise. So of course, you need to consider that the pacing is not the same if you are going to run for 6 kilometers downhill or if you start for 300 kilometers. But it's still impressive to see this huge gap in between those types of exercises. So coming back to the starting point and to the model of performance, highlighting that muscle damage are very important for performance in ultramarathon. Downhill section, considering that, are a major source of fatigue. Looking at differences in biomechanics between level running and downhill running, what has been observed there is a dog. Should I continue, Guy?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah?
We can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you. The beauty of the light.
Why? Okay, so I'm gonna try to speak louder.
Okay, now we cannot hear you.
Maybe you can cut everyone's microphone and only open one.
No, but in Marlene's place.
Okay.
No, since while we are waiting for you, just if you go back one slide, just to make sure that everyone understood, because it is important to mention peripheral fatigue. So this is only muscle fatigue. So this is not the total fatigue. And in particular, or UTMB, control fatigue is much more prevalent. But here we are only talking about muscle fatigue, right, Marlene?
Right. Yeah. It's what we call peripheral fatigue. So it's really a local fatigue.
Again, it's not from Marlene. It's not from Marlene.
No, it's not.
Raimundo Sanchez, I think.
Okay, sorry. I think it was you, Marlene. My apologies. So I will do something for you.
It's Raimondo Sanchez, I think. Sorry, Raimondo, to name you. Pointed you.
Okay, sorry. No, I was convinced it was
No.
so at your place.
I think that now it's okay. I don't know if you can hear me, but
yes. So
okay.
my point again, I thought it was you. Okay, go ahead.
So thanks, Guy, to precise these points. Yeah, it's really local fatigue, and we do not consider heat as fatigue coming from the brain, basically, and the central command. So yeah, coming back to biomechanics, and just to highlight some key differences in between downhill running and level running, what has been observed and synthesized in this literature review is that flight time is greater in downhill running, as well as step frequency. Shock intensity and impact forces are as well more important in downhill running, of course. Power input during especially the braking phase at the hip is more important, and as well as power input braking at the knee. So basically, this highlights the important negative work that the muscle have to perform, and especially in eccentric mode, which is, as ARASH just highlighted before, very stressful for the muscles. And the thing is that after downhill running, it could also impair your performance for the following level section. And here is just a very interesting graph published by Chen and collaborators. So basically, they ask their runners to perform a 40 minutes downhill run on a treadmill, and they just recorded the oxygen consumption, the running economy right after this downhill run. So it was on level running, and 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 4 day, 5 days after. And basically what they observe is that on the following level runs, the running economy, the oxygen consumption, let's say, is greater compared to before. So running downhill brings some high muscle damage, will change also the biomechanics, and as a matter of fact, at the end of the day, we also increase the oxygen consumption. So downs matter for performance, partly because of the large induced muscle damage, but running technique may modulate the magnitude of muscle fatigue. And here I would like to just to point out some differences in between these two running techniques that are commonly identified in running biomechanics. So a heel strike or rear foot strike pattern and a forefoot strike pattern, or let's say non-rear foot strike pattern, because sometimes it could be challenging to differentiate midfoot from forefoot. So now more and more we are talking about non-rear foot strike pattern in research. So first big differences in between those two running techniques are the position of the ankle at contact, with a more dorsiflex ankle for the rear foot strike pattern, of course, and a more plantarflex ankle for the forefoot strike, with greater muscle plantar flexors activity for the forefoot strike pattern. And then at the knee, something that has been highlighted many times is that the knee extension at contact is greater for rear foot strikers compared to forefoot strikers. And so the knee extensor activity, as well as the knee negative work, is greater for this group of runners. And finally, it's worth mentioning that in the frontal plane, because many times we talk about the sagittal plane, but in the frontal plane, there are also some differences in between those two techniques. And what has been observed is it's a greater knee abduction angle in the rear foot strike pattern. So coming back to trail running, what we have done a few years ago is that we asked people to run for 6 kilometers downhill. So it was on the field. And then right after the run, we just ask them to perform some neuromuscular tests to assess neuromuscular fatigue. While they were running during the downhill run, we recorded, thanks to 2 accelerometers, their running technique, whether or not they were striking the ground with their rear foot first or with their forefoot first. And what we have observed, basically, the first thing is that there were no correlation between the running technique and the performance. And here, when we talk about the running techniques, actually it's more the percentage of rear footsteps. Basically, this highlights the variability of the running technique over the entire run. But what we observed from a fatigue standpoint is that for foot strikers, there were a greater muscle fatigue at knee extensors. And something that that can explain that is that if they have actually a greater inflection at contact, this could increase the lever arm acting at the knee joint, but also lengthen the sarcomere, the muscle fibers, prior to eccentric contraction, which has been shown to increase the stress put on the fibers. But more interestingly, what we have observed is that actually the runners that switched a lot in between rear foot strike and forefoot strike during the run, they demonstrated a lower muscle local fatigue at knee extensors and a lower force loss at plantar flexors. And here I just would like to acknowledge Roger Cram, and I was very fortunate in Calgary 3 years ago to share a rafting boat with him. And 2 weeks before, he said this for uphill, that switching from run to walk could give relief to the soleus muscle. And I think that this is somehow the same thing here, is that by switching, we change how muscles are activated, we change the magnitude of activation for specific muscle groups. And this could be very interesting to relieve those muscles. So considering that, I just wanted to make some recommendation regarding footwear choice, because a lot of time when we are talking about running techniques, it's very related to footwear, because footwear, and especially the stack height is basically the heel thickness of the shoe, and the drop could influence this technique. And here I tried to gather all the studies that have worked on the effect of those two parameters on running technique for habitual rear foot strike runners. And so basically, we have here shoes that induce changes in running technique, and here shoes that induce no changes in running technique for those habitual rear foot strike runners. And so, given the fact that we would like the runners to switch between rear foot strike and forefoot strike, it's more challenging to accept to allow runners to heel strike, because forefoot strike, even with a high stack shoe or with a high drop, it's still possible. And so, considering that, I would recommend to choose shoes having these characteristics in terms of stack and drop. Because here I would say that maybe there are not enough plantar protection for trail running. Here, those may be too extreme and might generate unusual stress on plantar flexor muscle tendon units in heel strikers. And I think that here the high drops are not a good thing, also considering knee strains. This is something that has been shown, that when you are increasing the drop of the shoe, you are increasing this knee abduction angle, and this could bring other issues to the runner. Very interestingly also is that we observed in a study performed with the University of Toulon and Nice, we asked runners to perform a 40-minute downhill run on a treadmill with controlled, let's say, apparel and with compression garments. And basically, what we observed is that basically the muscle fatigue right after the exercise was not significantly different in between the two groups, in between the two conditions. But one day after, there were a better recovery of peripheral neuromuscular functions with the compressive garments, as well as lower perceived muscle soreness. And something that could explain that is with the compressive garments, we reduce basically the amount of muscle vibrations, all the vibrations traveling through the body when you are striking the ground. And the thing is that when you have vibration, because it's uncomfortable, you have to increase muscle activation for a mechanism called muscle tuning, reduce muscle fatigue, because vibration is something that is uncomfortable. You can maybe experience that in a gravel bike when you are riding your bike, for example, on a gravel road. It's very uncomfortable to have all those vibrations, so you just have to contract more on the handlebar to reduce vibration. This is basically the same thing in running. So it allowed to preserve comfort, but on the other hand, it increased this muscle activation. And so maybe that could induce a greater or earlier onset of muscle fatigue. So compressive garments could be also an interesting solution to reduce this perceived muscle soreness or even maybe the muscle fatigue. So downs matter for performance because of large induced muscle damage. Running technique may modulate magnitude of fatigue, and there exists path for the improvement of performance in downhill running. So this is a study that we have done with the University of Pont-Romeu. We were interested in knowing, okay, what factors can improve or affect performance in downhill run. So in Annecy, so pretty nice place, as you can see. We are pretty lucky because we have a great playground right beside the lab, and so we asked people, 28 experienced trail runners, to do this short, very short downhill run. We just recorded the time during the downhill run, as well as the foot strike technique. And right before, just before the downhill run, we did some testing just to have a kind of profiles of the runners. So we did some muscular evaluation to have the maximal force, the explosivity of knee extensors, and many things. We did some psychological tests as well, some maximal aerobic speed evaluation, and also some cognitive tests to test the reactivity, the visual reactivity of the subject. And what we observed is that one factor related to performance in this specific downhill run was the maximal aerobic speed, pretty logic. Then knee extensors explosivity. So basically here it was on the maximal isometric test. We recorded the time to maximal force. The percentage of non-refoot strike that was related to performance. So here it's a little bit tricky because we don't know what is the cause, what is the consequence, because what we know from literature is that the greater the speed, the more anterior the foot strike technique, right? So here we don't know if it's a cause or a consequence, but statistically speaking, this is two things that are related: performance in this downhill run and the percentage of the foot strike. But very interestingly, what we observe is that the visual reactivity, so basically the cognitive capacity of the subject, was related to performance, as well as a predisposition to take risks, assessed with a peak dominant scale. And this is very interesting, I think, because looking at our sample of 28 experienced trail runners, what we have is that the best time on this specific downhill was get by this guy. It's a professor at the University of Pont-Romeu, Grégory Doucet, and actually he was a former mountain biker. So really the predisposition to take risks, as well as, let's say, the cognitive capacity, are very interesting to improve performance in downhill running. So key takeaways. First things, manage the succession of downs is of great importance, as we have seen in the first study performed by Cyril Gindre and Thibault Louisiana on the UTMB. Changes in biomechanics affect the magnitude of muscle fatigue. Cognitive skills and psychological profile should be considered as substantial improvement path in downhill trail running. And of course, downhill is much more fun than uphill, as we have seen two weeks before. So thanks to all of you, and if you have questions, I don't know if we have time, but do not hesitate.
Thank you, Marlene, for this brilliant presentation, as usual. So maybe you can, before, actually, I don't think there is not that many questions, but maybe you can explain how you can measure a foot strike pattern in the field. I'm not sure everyone knows.
Okay. Okay, so for those who can see on this very small picture, sorry for that, I'm going to take the pointer. We put one accelerometers at the heel, one accelerometers at the forefoot, and then we just, as accelerometer, basically are able to record the instant of impact of those two parts of the foot we are able, by just calculating the time in between those two peaks, to say, okay, whether or not it's a forefoot that strikes the ground first or the heel that strikes the ground first. So it's a basic time analysis, basically. But if you do not have such tools, and also because the data processing is not something automatic, it's homemade code, let's say, you can use plantar pressures, you can use also inertial sensors. And if you do not have one of those means, one of those devices, you can also just took your iPhone, because today the sampling frequency of iPhone or smartphone do not have nothing to do with Apple, but smartphone, let's say, are pretty high, and you could have a very good idea of how runners strike the ground by just filming them in field, without, of course, telling them that you are filming. Otherwise, they're gonna have a non-natural biomechanics, I bet.
Okay, thank you. So there is one question, even though you talk about it a bit, which was, is there any substantial change in foot strike in downhill running? So I'm not sure if it means as fatigue occurs or comparing to flat or uphill running, but this is the question from Sid.
Yeah. Actually, here I think that just to answer to this question on this small graph, you have somehow the answer. So basically, you have the percentage of free foot step each runners in this study, and what you can see is that there are no runners having 100% of either rear foot strike or non-rear foot strike pattern. Basically, you are always switching, and first of all, because of the terrain, because in trail running it's so much irregular. You have to deal with the rocks, you have to deal with the roots, and so on. So you are all the time changing your foot strike pattern, your running technique, just to fit with the terrain, basically. But there are a large proportion of runners that are half rear foot striker and half forefoot striker, actually.
Okay, thank you. Roger, you have a, or it's not a question, it's a suggestion. Well, it's a kind of question. Can you open your mic? Or
Sure. Thanks, Marlene. That was fun on the rafting some years ago. But yeah, I was wondering, I really like the new ideas of risk-taking behavior. I wonder if wearing protective gear, such as gloves or maybe knee pads, would enhance people's risk-taking. I usually take gloves when I'm on a really rocky trail because I take more. Yeah.
That's a very good question. So I do not have any answer to give right now, but looking what happens in overfield, and especially, for example, skiing, and what happened in ski resorts with the ski helmet that are more and more popular, and skiing speed that are just increasing, I think that there is something, a kind of relationship between what you are wearing and the risk that you are able to take, basically. So yeah, that's a very good point here.
so do you think the skills are only important for the type of downhills that you have studied? So very short, so almost all out downhill. So which is not the typical downhills that you will see in trail running, and even less, of course, in ultra trail. But do you think it's still important in to be skilled, so to train your skills in downhill for traditional trail running?
By traditional, you means more, let's say,
like 40K to 100 miles.
Yeah, but regarding the technicity of the terrain, right?
In general.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, of course. I think that I do not have some studies and some data in my mind right now, but I think that the absolute speed in a UTMB or in this kind of downhill runs are very, very different. So of course, the risk-taking attitude, I think, is not the same, and the weight and the importance of this factor, yeah, I think is maybe lower in ultra distance, let's say.
Okay, so we have to move on, but thank you again. I had other questions, and I'm sure people, but we can come back to your presentation in the general discussion. We still have 3 speakers, so sorry about that. And in particular, maybe I saw that Gianluca was around, so maybe we can talk about this study that we did where we switched from rear foot to forefoot, and it didn't work. So maybe we can talk about that later. Anyway, so let's move to the next speaker. So we are very lucky to have another big name of running research, Wouter Hoogkamer. So Wouter, you can share your screen while I'm introducing you. So Wouter is a PhD, is an assistant professor in the Department of Kinesiology at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, where he runs the Integrative Locomotion Lab. So his lab performs a comprehensive approach to study human locomotion, integrating neurophysiology, biomechanics, and energetics. He's probably one of the very few people who has run 1,400 meters in less than 49 seconds and 50 miles in less than 6.5 hours. And the title of his presentation is How to Pace Runnable Downhills. Thank you, Wouter.
Right, thank you. Thanks, Guy. Can everybody hear me and see my screen?
Perfect, yes.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Guy, for organizing, and Fred and Thibault. I'm enjoying this 2 weeks ago and today. So today I'm going to be talking about how to pace runnable downhill. So importantly, I'm not talking about the downhills that ARASH and Marlene has been talking about, and probably what Marcel is going to be talking about later too. So this is not about high drops, steep slopes, high technicity. This is really about maybe for some of the people that are not so lucky to live in a mountainous area, but still do trail running, right? So there is trails, and even in some of the races that are in the mountains, there is sections of trails where it's very runnable, there's low technicity, and it's not super steep. So that's what I'm going to be talking about, even though Fred 2 weeks ago sort of presented this divided world where we either have city marathons, which are perfectly flat, and on the other spectrum, we got these trail marathons like Sagama, where it's just really mountainous. I guess there is some in between. And for example, I took one of the runs around here, Massachusetts. So this is kind of a 55 miler around this Quabbin Reservoir. And as you can see at the elevation profile, it looks pretty steep, but to be fair, we need to put it on the same scale as Zagama. So if you just look at the first half and put that on the same scale, it sort of spreads out, the vert gets a lot less. And what we see here is a much more rolling course, which looks a lot more similar to some of these slopes and declines that you see in the New York Marathon. And obviously, there's also some steeper stuff, but I'm really going to be sort of talking about these runnable sections where right here in the middle, there is this long, small decline. Before I do that, I kind of want to summarize Fred's presentation from 2 weeks ago as well, where he introduced a lot of the concepts that I will be talking about. So one is his first conclusion was that the cost of running, or I can call it metabolic rate, you can call it running economy, metabolic power, it's all sort of the same. The cost of running, the amount of energy that it takes to perform a running task. And what we know, what actually was shown in Colorado in the 2016, that if you are able to reduce the cost of running, you can actually run faster at the same effort. And then he went on to say that sort of in trail running, obviously this cost of running is affected by either the slope for uphill or downhill or the technicity. And again, I will be talking mainly about moderate declines with very limited technicity. And that, again, in some cases, a good cost of running measured on the road or the treadmill doesn't necessarily translate to a trail. I would sort of make the argument that for these runnable downhills, that might very well be the case. So it's still valuable to measure these things on a treadmill. And then finally, his last point was that optimizing running economy might not be the optimal for trail running. Again, I bet that Marcel is going to talk a lot about that after me. But again, I think that for runnable sections, dual track trails or single track without too many rocks and roots, there's still a value to sort of minimize your energy costs and see what happens if it changes. Final slide that I took from Fred. Don't mind the text, but really focus on this graph here, because it's a nice graph from the Minetti 2002 paper, where they sort of quantified the energy cost of running up very steep slopes and also down very steep slopes. And obviously 2 weeks ago, a lot of people talked about these fairly steep slopes for the uphill, and today most people will be talking about these very steep downhill grades. But I'm specifically interested in these moderate grades that are right there, right in the middle. And the main reason I was initially interested in that is because I've studied marathon road running a lot more before. So early on in 2017, when we first started thinking about how can we maybe break the 2-hour marathon barrier, we were also sort of saying like, well, if we just make this maximum allowable downhill, which would be a drop of 42 meters, how much faster can the runners run? And this is only for the second half, a slope of 0.2%. So again, ARASH talked about 20%. This is a 0.2%, so totally different. And then we talked about that more. Mainly we saw that in breaking 2 in Monza, they didn't break the 2-hour marathon, and then the Ineos team sort of reached out to us and asked like, look, how important is the course? Like, how much time do we lose by going up and down, and how much time do we lose by taking turns? After they consulted with us, they eventually found a very flat course with limited turns, and actually managed to have a great set of pacers and have Eliud Kipchoge break this 2-hour marathon barrier. And we then went on to sort of put our thoughts on this into a paper, because we had thought about it, and quickly just want to show, like, this is on the left side, the course in Monza, where they had the Breaking 2 event, where he ran 25 seconds over 2 hours. And basically they did 17 laps there. And for every lap, there was quite a bit of vert difference. So even though it was sort of presented as this Formula One course, which is almost flat, 17 times they sort of went up and down a 0.5% grade, versus what they found in Wien was this way longer course, where they only went up and down by 3 meters over this 9-kilometer section. So basically on average, that was only a 0.1%. And again, we wanted to quantify this. So we went to the data, but we only found a lot of studies that looked at very steep downhill and very steep uphill. They fitted some data, curves to it, equations. Most often the subjects were running fairly slow. So again, we're looking really about a 0.5% decline here, and there's just no data. There's just one data point between minus 10% and level. And as you can see, there's some differences in these lines here, and the slopes of these lines sort of are highly influenced by the fitting that is done on the extreme sides. So we were just interested to see what happens in this small area, and can we just assume that that is linear, and can we sort of look at that at a more moderate pace, a faster pace, not necessarily 2-hour pace, because I don't have many 2-hour pace marathoners in Amherst around. Anyway, so we sort of, before we did that, we just took that graph and sort of saw that there is about a 46 seconds difference between these two courses, which is interesting, very close to the actual time difference that was run. So part of those 45 different seconds in time difference could be fully due just to the course. All right, so again, we weren't too excited about just making this up based on these 2 data points. So we really set out to study this in more detail. So we wanted to quantify the metabolic rate of running down moderate slopes at a slightly higher speed, because before everybody had tested like 10 kilometers per hour, maybe 12. We went a little faster again. It couldn't go to much faster than that, just because I didn't have the Colorado runners around anymore. And here you actually see in the in the video that this is the actual slope. So 5% here is the maximum. It's not that steep at all, but we specifically went to put in those extra data points between 0 and -5, which was a project done by Michael Hester here. And then we quantified metabolic rate from the oxygen uptake, kind of what Fred talked about last time. And then additionally, we also used the stride pod to measure some stride running power, but in the interest of time, I'm just not going to talk about that today. Not surprisingly, we did show that running downhill does reduce the energy cost of running, and basically it's very consistent across the different subjects. It's definitely going down when you sort of then compare that to the rate at level running. We see that if you say that level running is 100%, that basically for every % of decline, this energy cost goes down by 4%. And I know you might just think I'm just trying to be Dr. 4% here, just repeating that 4% number that I find on shoes and downhills. But it's interesting because it also kind of means that if you do get a 4% benefit from a shoe, that is very similar to just continuously running down a 1% grade. So those are sort of equivalent, which is kind of nice. Obviously, as you can see from the data, this is sort of the average, and it varied a little bit. So some people might be more experienced downhill runners, and they get more savings, up to 5% per 1% decline, and for some people was less, up to 3%. All right, so we basically have landed on this number that for moderate declines that are runnable, every % of decline can save you about 4% of energy, and that can add up. Like I said, 5% decline will save you 20% metabolic rate, which is a lot. So what can we do with this? Well, interesting feature, when I go on Strava and hover over these elevation profiles, it will actually tell me the grade. So again, I'm interested in how someone should pace these downhill miles in this section, right around here halfway over the first 40 kilometers, and it says it's a 3.5% decline. And then I know that I would probably be saving 14% of metabolic energy. Then obviously the next question is, well, how much faster can I run? And luckily enough, we thought about this before, again, in sort of the scenery of the shoes and the findings. So together with Shalea, we came up with this calculator and this paper, and we sort of quantified, taking into account sort of the relation between energy cost and running speed and air resistance, how much faster one can run with specific energy savings. And to make it simple, we also added an Excel-based calculator there. And so you can just download that, put in your own numbers. So I did that. So I'm about 185, I'm 70 kilograms, and I was running down a 3.5% grade. Every 1% decline gives me 4%. So I'm saving 14% energy. I got an improvement of 14% in running economy. I also know that I can sort of sustain a 7.5-minute pace for about 50 miles or a 440-minute kilometer pace. So putting that in there, and then I'll can calculate that I can actually, in this downhill, could be running a 407-minute mile pace. And again, I encourage everybody to just go to this link. It's the tiny URL with running economy calculator, or try to find the paper. Guy might share the paper. It's freely available. You can just download this Excel sheet and plug in these numbers. And then you can see how much faster you can be running on the downhills. And just to see what I actually did, I was at that point running a 4-minute mile. So I was running 4-minute kilometer, sorry, running these 7 seconds too fast. And that might explain why towards the end, I was definitely slowing down. So I think this is basically what I wanted to talk about. I had some extra slides on the shoes because it came up last week, but I'm just quickly going to skip that in the interest of time. But I do want to point out for the scientists and biomechanists in the audience that during the NACOP Congress in August, we will be having a symposium on the biomechanics of trail running on this first official day on the Monday in the afternoon. So look out for the schedule if you're attending that conference and join that session. We'd like to hear from you there in the panel discussion as well. And I think that sort of wraps up my talk.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Of course, we'll share the paper with the audience. Is there any question for Wouter? I may have one which is actually more a very practical question. So at this very slow, very low slope, what did you observe in terms of technique? Because as a runner, my experience is that for minimal slope like that, you may want to lean forward, and at some point you cannot do that anymore because then you're going to fall. So what's your did you do some kinematic measurements at the same time, or can you
Unfortunately, we don't have full body kinematics. We do have the ground reaction forces, so we can look at the cadence and contact time changes, similar to what ARASH has been talking about. I haven't evaluated any leaning in that respect. So yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it's tricky on the treadmill. The downhill running is a little bit artificial on the treadmill, like I sort of acknowledged early on. So it would be interesting to see more field measures there too, and see what it does with form and technicity, how it changes things.
Okay, thank you. I'm checking the chat.
I have a question, if I may.
Of course.
So we in the marathon study that Kipchoge ran, we had you had 0.1% increase, plus 0.1% and negative 0.1%, and then I'm wondering if so we save some energy if we're running downhill, and then is it equivalent to increase in energy, because the same thing is going to happen. At negative 0.1%, I'm running downhill, and then I need to do the same loop, and then I'm going to do plus 0.5%. Is it gonna increase by much, by the same amount, or less, or more?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's sort of well, in general. If you look at this graph, what we mainly see is that anything up has a steeper slope to it than the downhill section, which means that running downhill will provide you with less savings than what the uphill is going to cost you, because that uphill line on the right side of the graph is going to be steeper. Obviously, we decided to zoom in really on this aspect. Again, these lines to the right are also often based on data points that are further up. So when we're talking about the road races that Kipchoge is doing, where these grades are like less than 0.5%, I don't know how discontinuous these lines are and how much steeper the uphill is. Again, if the uphill side is steeper on that line, it means that the amount of energy cost goes up faster than the savings that you get on the downhill. And then in addition to that, which again, sort of, I think some people alluded to it, but we saw it 2 weeks ago when we talk about alternating walking and running in the uphill to sort of get some muscles, some relief. I think that for a road marathon, it might also be sometimes fun for the runner to not do exactly the same thing for 42 kilometers. And if there is a very minor up or down, it might mix things up a little bit. If there's just a short thing to break things up, just out of boreness and just having the same load all the time. So that would be another interesting question to see. Like theoretically, from an energetics perspective, flat is always better than going up and down. If it's only moderate, we don't know how big the difference of these lines is, and then again, maybe from sharing the load or spreading the load, it might be nice to have every now and then have a short up and down in there just to break the monotonous cadence of running the same thing all the time.
Okay, thank you. All right, so time is flying, so we have to move. Thank you again, Wouters. So we'll move to the next speaker, Marcel Lemire. So Marcel, you can share your screen, please. Okay, perfect. So Marcel has defended his PhD thesis in 2019 at the University of Strasbourg in France, after being a physical education teacher for 20 years. Marcel is currently an assistant professor at the Faculty of Science and Technology in Mulhouse, close to Strasbourg, so northeast of France. He has published 8 papers, almost all of them on the topic of downhill running, and he is also a very good runner. And he has done basically all the disciplines of running, so trail running, 3,000 meters, steeplechase, cross country, mountain running, and 10K road running. So Marcel, please.
So do you hear me? Yes? Okay.
Yes, perfect. Yeah.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for this webinar, Frédéric, Thibault, and Guillaume, as well as their lab, the LIBM, for inviting me. My presentation mainly deals with the physiological factors related to downhill running performance, of course. To begin, let me review the factors of aerobic performance from a classical point of view. It is, of course, multifactorial, as you know. Maximal oxygen consumption is likely the main endurance performance determinant. And VO2 max is mainly genetically preset. If your parents have a high VO2 max, you have a greater chance to also have a great one. Even with a rough or long training period, VO2 max, you know, is difficult to upgrade. It is well accepted that the other factors are metabolic thresholds and running economy, according to joint and coil. Some other endurance factors are commonly listed: hardware, such as shoes, poles, nutrition, tactical aspects, and the experience of the runner, of course. Honestly, for these aspects, I'm not the good guy. For instance, Nicola Giovanelli has published interesting results in the use of poles, in incline walking and running, or Marlene Giandolini for hardware, ARASH for biomechanics. Okay. The question is, what are the limiting factors in downhill running specifically? Uphill and downhill running, as you know, elicit very different running velocities, featuring different contribution of concentric, green, and eccentric muscle actions. Indeed, parallel ground reaction forces versus time traces show that braking forces, mainly eccentric in red, muscle action is growing with negative slope increasing. So it is suggesting that lower limb muscle strength should be more important in downhill than in uphill running. So to investigate the implication of aerobic fitness, lower limb strength, explosivity, agility, we studied a population of 10 male endurance trained athletes with an average VO2 of 70 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And all subjects were invited to perform 5 experimental sessions. At visit 1 and 2, they performed a field time trial in down or uphill running while recording gas exchange and heart rate. During these 2 visits, an experimenter encouraged the athletes on an e-bike during all the time trial. At visit 3, they performed a maximal incremental test on the track and also velocity and agility tests. At visit 4, they performed some one repetition maximum half squat test in order to assess the maximal strength for lower limb extension, and a visit 5 leg stiffness, squat jump, counter movement jump, and also local endurance of the lower limb. And all visits were, of course, randomized. So we found that cardiorespiratory responses through our time trials were close to maximal values. As you can see here on the left, VO2 max was very high and close to VO2 was very high and close to VO2 max. The same for heart rate, which was also very close to maximal values. Whereas velocity was very higher in downhill than in uphill running, 20 versus 12 kilometers per hour for average speed on the 5 kilometers. The VO2 was lower and heart rate was similar in the two conditions. Using a simple regression analysis, this study showed that 5 kilometer up and down running time trial performance are both correlated to the velocity of VO2 max here in the middle, at the top, and uphill running is specifically correlated to the velocity at the second voluntary time threshold, whereas downhill running is specifically correlated to the first one and to relative lower limb maximal strength and to squat jump. Using commonality regression analysis now, this study showed that 5 kilometer uphill and downhill running time trial performances are both well explained by 3 independent predictors. However, if 2 predictors are shared, named the velocity at VO2 max and maximal strength, they both contributions are different, very different, and specifically BMI is correlated to uphill running and musculoskeletal stiffness was correlated to downhill running. So the first take-home message would be that both up and down time trials elicit very high cardiorespiratory responses, although with dramatically different running velocities, of course. The velocity of VO2 max is not a surprise, is a strong predictor of both up and downhill time trial performances, and lower limb maximal strength and musculoskeletal stiffness are best predictor for downhill than for uphill running. So, energy cost of running is also another major determinant. And net energy cost of running, heart rate, ventilation, as Wouter has shown just before me, described a sigmoid shape, forward slopes, with a plateau in between negative slopes here, not only for energy cost, as Millet has shown. And our team computed an optimum steady slope close to -17% in 29 recreation of hits. And thanks for Roger Cram for reviewing this paper. The cost of running, therefore, varies with the slope of the ground, and this cost increases with increasing positive slope, as Frederick Sabater has explained in the first part of the webinar 2 weeks ago. And Uter Cram showed just before me the figure of Minetti also. And decreases to a minimum to -10, 15%, and after that it increases again on steeper negative slopes. However, yet the response of heart rate components, which is very specific in downhill running, such as cardiac output and systolic ejection volume, have never been studied in clean running. So it was also a part of interest, and we found actually that heart rate and cardiac outputs both positively correlated with uphill running. It's not the topic of today, okay? But in downhill running, it was the spatio-temporal parameters which correlated with energy cost of running, such as leg stiffness, step frequency and length, and contact time. So the second take-home messages would be that the determining factors of energy cost of running might be slope specific. We all agree. Mainly metabolic and cardiovascular heart rate, cardiac output, and arteriovenous difference in uphill running versus mainly neuromuscular and mechanical vertical stiffness, spatial temporal gait parameters in downhill running. One question that remains is, could we reach VO2 max in downhill running? At what slope is it still possible? And just to make a research on PubMed, we found about 2,400 results for maximal incremental test on treadmill, and only one for downhill running, with a shallow slope of -3 degrees for lethal, and only 6 on uphill running, with 3 who showed that it was a similar VO2 max reached versus level running, and 3 others who showed a higher VO2 max in uphill versus level running. And in downhill running, we didn't find anything, just for mice with a similar VO2 max in downhill and level running. And in cycling, eccentric cycling, we found a lower VO2 max than in concentric cycling. Based on this background, when comparing cardiorespiratory response in -15% in incremental test, we found that VO2 peak, not shown here, and ventilation here, and also tidal volume were lower in downhill running at the end of the test. But breath frequency and heart rate were reached maximal values also in downhill running. Regarding to the spatiotemporal parameters of the maximal incremental test, except similar stride frequency in downhill running, here, all other parameters were slope dependent. These results are consistent with those of Liefeld in downhill and value check in uphill running. Well, I have to put the sound. At maximum intensity here, VO2 max is not reached during an incremental downhill test, whereas maximal heart rate is reached and the velocity is higher. Just to show here on the right, is running at the almost last stage at 24 km/h, which is a very high speed, very strenuous for the vertical loading rate. And at VO2 peak in downhill running, tidal volume and ventilation are lower, while breath frequency is reached, maximal value, suggesting a more superficial ventilation in this modality, especially. At maximum intensity, the stride pattern is slope dependent, except that step frequency is similar between downhill and level running. So thanks for your attention, and if you have some questions, it will be a pleasure for me.
Thank you so much, Marcel. Lots of data from your interesting work. So we have at least one question, but there are actually a side discussion in the chat, so I may have missed some. I think, Marlene, you had a question for Marcel, if you can open your mic.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear because I just shut down the volume.
Yeah, Marlene?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Marcel, for your presentation. I just have one question. Why, according to you, why musculotendinous stiffness is so important in downhill running?
Yeah, musculotendinous stiffness is, as you know, a part of eccentric muscle action and in the mechanism of length stretching cycle, it is like elastic mechanism, and it trigger like in the vertical loading rate a very hard the word is missing, but it's like when you are stretching a muscle, you know that the myotatic reflex induces a higher force. So here you have some free energy, which is adding to the to which one we cost something, and together you institute more forces and so no, it should be that the energy cost of running should be lower. I think we just here make some vertical stiffness test, as you know, with 10 rebounds on the ground, with some opto jump next. It would be interesting to also maybe do more tests with a force platform and with gold standard hardware, and to confirm these results in other conditions.
Thanks.
Thanks for the question.
So I know the methods that you used and Marlene used are not the same, but if I'm not mistaken, your conclusions are different. So you are saying that in terms of agility, I mean. So you are saying that agility, whatever that means, is not a predictor factor of performance in downhill running. And Marlene, you more or less said the opposite. So, and it was not the same speed because your downhill was longer. So I guess your athletes were running slower, but still. So maybe both of you, Marlene, and so this the question is around the basically what we already more or less discussed earlier, the importance of being skilled and not fear or scared of running fast. Yeah. So can you comment on that?
We also conducted full agility and t-test which assess agility and the coordination and the skills of changing direction very fast. And with this test, we didn't find any correlation with the performance. So it's like you demonstrated for this part. So I think it's very important to mention the test used, because the results will be a little bit different. In this moment, I just conduct a study with 1 month training downhill running, and we would like to know if this chronic training would have an effect on this agility and muscular stiffness and neuromuscular fatigue also.
Marlene, do you want to comment or not necessarily?
No, I totally agree with Marcel when he said that agility is a pretty vague word, and I think that we can put many things behind, and depending how we assess this thing, we can observe results that are pretty much different. In our test, we didn't focus on, let's say, lower limb coordination with lateral bouncing. That's how you did that, right? Regarding agility?
Yes, in a non-still published paper, I also studied the lateral work, especially in downhill running. And we found that the lateral work, positive and negative, variation of both, was superior in downhill running than in level or uphill running, and more the slope is steeper in downhill running, the more the lateral forces are and work both are higher.
Yeah, because in this study from from our side, we did assess visual reactivity with a pretty simple test. There were basically 4 spots, and when it's the lights pop up, they just have to put their hand like this, you know. So it's very focused on the visual aspects and not at all on the coordination or whatever.
That's interesting things. There is a lot of things to do. Like in the chat, you mentioned the VR, the virtual reality.
Yeah. Yeah, we
even on the field.
Yeah, this is very challenging.
Okay, so I see many other questions in the chat, but we have to move on to the next speaker. We can go back to those questions in the general discussion. So the last speaker, as we did 2 weeks ago with Jason, is like the expert view from a coach. Of course, it will be on training for downhill this time, and the coach is David Roche. So a few words about David. I'm sure many of you know David anyway. So he coaches the Some Work All Play team, and his athletes on the team have won races, very small races, such as the Western States, CCC, Leadville 100, etc., and dozens of US national championships from 10K to 100 miles. And when not coaching, David writes for Trail Running magazine, hosts the Some Work All Play podcast with his wife and co-coach Megan, and gets training advice from his dog Eddie. So David, please, looking forward to your thought about this. We cannot hear you, David.
Okay, here I am. Of course I had to mess that up because I'm quite nervous. I feel like this is a lot like before a race where you feel like you have to get into the bathroom line pretty early. So I'm really excited. It's an honor to be here. Everyone that was speaking before me, absolutely brilliant. I've learned so much. I've tried to update my presentation a little bit as I went listening. So hopefully it reflects some of that. But what I'm going to try to do here is take that scientific context and really bring it into the real world with what I see in practice, hopefully not presenting too much of just this is what I think and more like a generalized thing that people can agree with, though. I really would love for people to disagree and you can ask questions or push back. I'm totally open to that. Really try to keep an open mind because I think that's the secret of downhills. Like we do not know the answer, right? Like a lot of these studies we're talking about right now are 30-minute bouts. And then we have studies that are done at UTMB or Western States that involve 100 miles of this. And the absolute physiological crap storm we see after the 100 miles is not quite the same thing that we're testing in the 30 minutes. So I'm going to try to bring all of that together into some 5 tips at the end for training. But first, I want to start with a little introduction that you see here on the screen. So here on the right, the photo is of Hannah LaFleur. She's 2-time winner of Mount Marathon in Alaska. I think that this race, Mount Marathon, tests downhill running at its absolute extremes to an extent that might not even be safe. So on the left here on the Strava profile you have here is from Max King this year, who won for men. And what I thought was fascinating, probably gets to some of the energy cost equations that we were looking at earlier, is the 1 mile segment averages negative 50% grade. And at those grades, the grade adjusted pace, the average gap that you see right here, switches, it flips. So usually, obviously, you're going downhill, less energy cost. It's apparently so steep that Max did the equivalent of a 3-minute, 55-second mile down that mountain. But what's even more wild is Hannah here, who I coach. She did a 3-minute, 40-second per mile equivalent. And that equates to about a 2.5-minute kilometer equivalent, according to the Strava algorithms. Obviously, those are not well calibrated because they weren't putting out that much work, but it points out sometimes in these trail races, we're pushing the limits of physiology, of our understanding of it, of the algorithms. So I'm going to try to bring all of that together. First, you're all awesome. It's an honor to be here. I'm the coach of the Some Work All Play team. My wife, Megan, is the real star of the operation with coaching. She's a doctor, PhD in epidemiology from Stanford, and is the current co-research director of Western States. So any ideas you have for future research projects, keep her apprised of it. They're looking to do some really cool things there. And coach the Some Work All Play team. a bunch of athletes that you may have heard of. We're going to talk about some of them today. And basically, it's just an honor to be here. I've seen all of your names in so many places, and it's just incredibly remarkable to me to get to be included. Okay, so quick presentation structure. I'm going to just go through essentially how I view training in the context of all these studies. And so at the bottom here, you see this 4-step thing, and I wanted to just quickly point that out. So for me, the way I try to ground training with Megan is we start in overarching training theory. And for us, we largely base it on Canova principles, so Renato Canova, applying it to trails, largely running economy dependent. That's not necessarily every trail running coach, and we totally agree with different approaches. The cool thing about trail running, different things work, whereas in road marathoning, it's very similar. So we ground a lot of our principles in road and track running and then bring it to the trails to try to create the fastest athletes possible. Not the only way to do it. But then we make sure that those principles are validated by physiology. If we can't find a physiological principle for it, we keep looking. And if we can't find one, then we bag it. Then we go to applied studies, like a lot of the ones mentioned today. We have changed the way we coach downhills based on some of the studies that people have already presented. Some of the main things we talk about at our dinner table. Things get sexy in our house, apparently. And then the final is real world application, where we look at the specific data we gather on our athletes using Megan's epidemiology background and feed it back into training theory and hopefully continue that process over and over. I hope I'm a much better coach now than I was a year ago, let alone 5 years ago. And Megan's been a big part of that. Okay, so I wanted to start with a hypothetical study. This is very similar to a lot of the actual study protocols in the world. But basically, imagine uphill run. We'll measure someone's cost of running at that point. Then a downhill run that's quite steep and rather fast. And then another uphill run, the second bout. And I presented 3 hypotheses there. And I think the big thing in, this gets back to some of the principles in the first webinar, is that the first uphill bout largely is speed. I mean, I know it's complicated and you need to be specifically trained for it to a certain extent. But if you give me a track runner who has run a 13-minute 5K, I'm going to show you someone that can run uphill really fast if you give me just a few weeks. Maybe not even that, maybe just a day, just to tell them what to expect. But then the time on the second uphill bout, we would start to probably see offsets for that athlete and for many others. And that offset, I think, is the magic answer in what predicts some trail and ultra running performance. And that gets all to the elements that past presenters have talked about today that I'm going to get into in a second. Fortunately, we also have a real world test of that. So the US Mountain Running Championships is held every year. Some years it's just uphill. And this depends on the structure of the World Mountain Champs that the athletes qualify for. Some years it's uphill. You go up a mountain and then you go down the mountain. And then sometimes it's you go up and down, up and down, up and down. And basically uphill years, largely predictable. Uphill to downhill years, somewhat predictable as long as athletes can run downhills, like have some proficiency, as Marlene's study was getting into, with whether you're courageous enough, perhaps, and a risk taker, and have the form to do it. But then in years with multiple uphill and downhill laps, things go crazy. You start to see athletes qualify that you wouldn't expect. And that probably gets into their specific ability at downhill and how they train for it, how that impacts their subsequent updills. So up here on the screen, I have an example, which is Tabor Hemming, an athlete we coach who just won the US Mountain Running Championships this year. And basically the big advance for her over the last year she was 15th in the first year we started coaching her, was that she got really good at downhills in the meantime through just some training interventions that I'm going to share with you. But the point being, people might look at Tabor and say, oh, you just won the US Mountain Championships, you're now the best climber. It's like, she's a very good climber, she's insanely talented, but the big change year over year was downhill proficiency. So those races are just 10K. What happens at UTMB or Western States, or these races that throw so much cumulative stress at athletes that it's a very different physiological context? I think that's the big question of coaching, and it's why trail running can be such a magically interesting area with different results. Other presenters have gone over this. I actually wanted to say that as I was doing follow-up research, I saw that there's a July 6, 22 study that came out of this institution on downhill running. Didn't get a chance to dive into it too deeply, but very cool that research is coming out all the time on this. So basic rule is, first, we start with actual muscle damage and issues that happen, but then also peripheral fatigue and how that influences muscle fibers and muscle fiber contractility. I love the MVC studies that we've been looking at throughout. But one of my favorite studies ever was conducted at Western States in 2012. And what it did is it just took blood tests right after the race and looked at their creatine kinase levels. And I think 13 athletes had levels over 100,000. One athlete had 212,000 CK, which should get you admitted to a hospital immediately. But fascinatingly, that didn't correlate at all with clinical outcomes after that. So in other words, these really long events introduce stresses to the body that are wild. The types of things that if you showed to a doctor that wasn't well versed in this field, they would panic. They would get you on dialysis immediately. And that's a product of the muscle damage. But then on top of muscle damage, you also just have fatigue and how that mounts up and impacts subsequent performance things. A couple studies already been mentioned. No need to really get into those. But the basic principle is that downhills without training are death. We see this constantly in coaching. We're fortunate enough now that we often have athletes come to us that are, top track athletes, athletes like Tabor Hemming, who ran for the University of Colorado. And there is a steep learning curve, and that all comes down to downhills. And I think that that steep learning curve is not learning to run them once, it's learning to run them multiple times, the repeated bout effect, as we're going to get into. So what that fatigue looks like from my perspective, from a coach's perspective, without graphs, one is unexplained performance decreases after repeated bouts, especially once you get into accumulating vert totals of 3,000 meters or so. That it starts to get wild, but even anything over 1,000 meters. Poor fatigue resistance, I'm going to mention that in a second. Post-event soreness, obviously, and then unfortunately sometimes hospital trips. Here I have a image of an athlete we coached named Drew Holman, who was podium at Western States last year, was 5th this year, amazing athlete. But last year, after his podium performance, we spent some time in the emergency room together from some issues that he had after the delayed onset soreness. So points out that this is a high stakes thing. This isn't just performance. This is health and your long-term ability to adapt to this work and have it be a successful thing. I briefly wanted to mention as a quick aside, a little test we do, not validated across anyone outside of our team. So don't use this, but it just points out how we're thinking about this. It's just a basic fatigue resistance test. We know what an athlete can do climbing at LT2 at just throughout the training block. We have that as a background thing we're measuring informally for the most part, just on Strava. But then what is that LT2 climb after 1,500 kilojoules of work? We model this after some of the studies in cycling that look at fatigue resistance more generally. And the offset between those two numbers predicts so much about performance. Like, you give me that offset and just give me an overarching examination of someone's training, just like their miles per week or kilometers per week in vert, and we can get pretty close to predicting outcomes sometimes. And it makes us sometimes seem like wizards and sometimes seem like witches because we're predicting really negative things that you might not be able to see just in training examples. Drew Holman has the best fatigue resistance we've ever tested, along with Claire Gallagher. So repeated bout effect, obviously everyone loves this, but I think the really complex thing with repeated bout effect is what happens when you start to accumulate these bouts, when it's not just 30 minutes downhill and we're looking at MVCs. I'm talking 10 hours of downhill in the ultras, or downhills that are done at breaking the Strava algorithms, as Max King and Hannah LaFleur did at Mount Marathon. And so my example here in the photo is John Kelly, an athlete we coach, who does these multi-day FKTs. You might have heard the Pennine Way in the UK, or Wainwright's that have, Wainwright's has over 100,000 feet of climbing and descending. And seeing how his body has responded over time has been so illuminating. So many things I barely understand. One being, looking back at some of the studies that were shared from Marlene, for example, the impacts to his physiology were really bad, obviously, after like 24 hours because it just happens. But then after about 48 or 72 hours, his performance started to tick back up. Very weird thing in multi-day events that you might see. And then ARASH had amazing takes on this about the 2 bouts 3 weeks apart. Amazing stuff. But some other considerations that apply in coaching that I'm really interested in, and we try to quantify as soon as we start working with athletes. One, muscle fiber typology. If an athlete is more intermediate, which we try to identify in the first few weeks, they may need more vert, we find, and possibly due to these MVC losses. We're not exactly sure the exact mechanism. Another gender may play a role. There's some evidence in some studies that estrogen could have a protective effect against some of this damage. Who knows for sure? We find that men generally need to do a little more vert. Oh, and then I loved what was said about mental state and risk taking. That's obviously plays a big role too in how this unfolds. I've been fortunate enough myself to win a couple national championships, and I think back, and both times it was purely from downhill running because I was a young kid that didn't understand much and had no fear. Now I am so scared I will never do that again. And so now I am purely a coach because I have developed some fear over time. So how can we harness this repeated bout effect for elite performance? That's the big question that I think every coach is trying to answer. So a quick step back to our coaching priorities so I can check my biases because, there's tons of amazing coaches that view this very differently. We try to learn from each of them, including the ones that disagree with us. So first one, we try to improve running economy as much as possible. I know Wouter mentioned some of the research that indicates, hey, in trails that may not make that big of a difference. But then you look at some of the other studies from Marcel and you're like, hey, VVO2 max still matters. And I bet if you take Kipchoge and told him, hey, you need to win UTMB, we're seeing some interesting things in a year. Other things that has evidence of multiple year-over-year growth, we try to quantify that in terms of VLT or VAM at LT, so like climbing at LT, but that's debated. 2, improve metabolic and aerobic efficiency. This is where Canova and more recently the Norwegian methods of training come in. And then the final one is we focus so heavily on downhills because we think that if an athlete is really fast and an athlete is aerobically efficient, if they can withstand the downhills, they're going to be great once they learn the logistics of running long distances. But that's a really tough element. But it points out that downhill running is one of our 3 big prongs. We view uphills as, yeah, it matters, but like you give me the fastest athlete on earth and we can have him winning a mountain championship. But as long as it doesn't have too many downhills. So 1 and 2 are debated, and I totally acknowledge that. I don't think 3 is fully debated. I think everyone understands that downhills are what sets people apart. Example here is Claire Gallagher winning CCC, amazing athlete we coach, who one of the most remarkable downhill runners I've ever seen, amazing uphill runner, just good all-around athlete in every way, and also a remarkable human if you've ever had the chance to meet her. So what I'm going to do now is go over 5 goals that we have in training. I think that these goals are trying to incorporate the research and what we've seen in practice, and they're constantly evolving. I'm going to try to be general for the most part. Hopefully everyone agrees with these, but might be a little bit mix and match. First one, practice good form. Some of the coolest things that I learned today were for like Marlene's study, for example, about how form interacts with performance. And I wanted to, that being said, provide a little bit of a counterpoint of just in practice, how every athlete is different. Yes, across the population, this matters. My example of an athlete that's really good at it is Meg McKenzie here, who is podiumed at the Golden Trail Series, who we coach, who runs with these soft, light strides. She's clearly not her ground contact time doesn't just increase massively, as we were seeing in some of those studies. The counterpoint would be Ludovic Pomeray, who's just top 10 at Western States. At the World Championships in either 2015 or one of those years, I remember getting passed by him on a downhill, like halfway through the race. I've never seen anything like it. He just runs down the hill as if it doesn't, he just like is angry at it. He's just going down this mountain in a way that you don't see from someone like Killian or Meg McKenzie. And I think his style clearly works for him. He's one of the best ever, but it points out a little complicated in how you develop this for athletes, but we always try to say, hey, quick, light strides, keep that going. The faster your strides can be over time, the better, especially in long events. Goal 2, throughout the year, try to aim to run some downhills with purpose in your long runs. I loved what Wouter was saying here about the reduced cost of this. And essentially what we try to do is say, hey, we get there's a reduced cost. Let's speed up to try to prevent yourself from just getting good at running downhill slower. This is a way to get a background pulse to harness some of that repeated bout effect without specific training. A lot of different ways you can do this. I have Ashley Brossovin here, who trains in Colorado in the snowy conditions, so she can't do huge downhills, but we try once a week, if there's any snow-free surfaces, to get her going up and down a little bit consistently and not doing it slow, because I think that there's a huge element here in biomechanical adaptations in developing those neuromuscular learning abilities and the amount of force that your body absorbs. So just once a week, we have them just focus on purposeful flow. Heart rate will still be generally pretty low because they're not sprinting it or anything. So that's the background. Now let's get into the specifics. You're going downhill in your races. They're coming up. You got to get good. You got to compete. Let's say at the international level. You want to win UTMB or Western States. What do you do? Goal 3. Here's the 3-week number from ARASH, the repeated bout effect. But we want this to be a focused, hard effort. Not just like running your normal effort. We need this to be faster than you're going to see in a race. This is a little bit debated in trails too, but I think there's evidence that the eccentric contractions that we're seeing cannot be fully harnessed unless you put, like that you're seeing at the end of an ultra in particular, cannot be fully harnessed unless you push a little harder than you're ever going to push, because we're not running as far as we're running in those ultras. The accumulated work is going to be so high. So largely we do that through tempo runs, not specific downhill intervals. We'll just have them run for, let's say, 30 or 60 minutes between, you know, VT1, VT2, possibly progressing above on some steep ups. Keep that going all year. An example here of someone who excels at this is Scotty Hawker, an athlete we coach to watch out for this year, because he was third at UTMB in 2019, second at CCC last year, and he's coming back to UTMB this year. I'm not a scientist, but I see a progression there in those numbers. But he is a relatively low volume athlete, but does focus on strong downhills, especially coming up on his season. So right now he's doing back-to-back long runs almost every week with strong downhills. And it's the way we try to make him into a endurance monster and a fatigue resistance monster without necessarily doing huge volumes. Goal 4, this gets to very steep races, things like UTMB or Hard Rock, or even short distance races like Golden Trail. At least 4 weeks, and ideally 8 to 12, we include a weekly training day with faster downhills on top of overall vert. So let's look at that in 2 ways. 1, overall vert, weekly vert. Try to accumulate a substantial amount, but don't have that be the focus. We still need running economy to be at the forefront. But at least once a week, we try to make it happen on downs in a more focused way. So the Strava file you see down here is from a workout we call the Hill Beast. It's 10, 8, 6, 4, 2 minutes up a steep uphill with run down steady recovery. That file, it's probably tough to tell because it doesn't have any context, but it's one of the most remarkable workouts I've ever seen. It's from an athlete named Eli Hemming here in the United States, who's going to take the international world by storm. And his performances on this, on the uphill and downhill, are so off the charts that it's kind of scary to think what he's capable of. He was just second at the US Mountain Champs, but it's just the beginning for him because he's an endurance athlete. So our idea is we need to make athletes impervious to these downhills, because as much as it feels like it's uphill fatigue that's getting us, often it's downhill. So accumulate more vert, but then also run some downhills faster, at least like ideally once a week. And then goal 5, strength train. This gets back to some of the presentations today. You know, we're seeing things that mimic squats, as ARASH was pointing out. So not to say you need to do squats, you can if you like it, but we like to have some of those eccentric muscle contractions in the background all year, especially for athletes that can't get tons of vert. We have some programs online, but this is one of those also highly debated things. Ideally, we have athletes work with a strength coach, but we don't like strength to have substantial muscle damage, because you know we're going to be instigating a lot of that in training. We don't need to have it to a maximum extent outside of the initial adaptation period from strength. So I included some sample weeks of how this actually looks in practice. This would be an athlete doing huge, like very large volume. Let's say this is 90 miles a week on 6 days with 15 or 20K vert. Let's say an example of an athlete doing that might be Matt Daniels, an athlete who's finished 4th at Western States. Just brushing over it really quick, for athletes like Scotty, who might be a little bit more injury or stress limited, we focus a little bit more on steep hills, getting closer to their events. And then finally, a sample off-season week. You see Saturday there is trying to harness that Wilder effect. It might not necessarily have much vert, especially if it's a snowy area, but we're still trying to focus on downhills. A little Norwegian double workout there. Just to give you some context, you can go back and pause it on the recording if you'd like. And then my last slide, the most important thing is you kind of have to accept that you're just going to be a downhill monster. You don't become a downhill monster with eventually deciding you're going to be, because every single day you're out there making a decision that downhills are a place you can excel. A lot of athletes sell themselves short, especially at first, and think, oh, this just isn't my thing. And yes, there are some, physiological variables that change that at baseline. But over time, if you harness that power of belief and going for it on the downs a little bit more often with a little bit better form and a little bit more confidence, I think almost any athlete can be a downhill monster. So thank you all. Absolutely an honor to be here, and I appreciate everything you do. And feel free to rip anything I said to shreds in the comments or questions if you'd like.
Thank you so much, David. That was a lot. Very interesting stuff. I may want to start actually asking, it's not really a question, but when you talk about strong downhill or fast downhill, so what does it mean exactly? So what In other words, what are the instructions that you give to your athlete when you tell him or her, okay, this session is a strong downhill session?
Great. So in general, in background, it's purposeful, relaxed flow. So for most athletes, for non-elite athletes, 50K or 50-mile effort where you have intention, but you're not hammering yourself. For very, very advanced athletes, you're talking about longer ultra distance type effort. But essentially, we're not wasting time on downhills rather than pushing really hard. So that's on the background. And then on the more specific work, we're talking more about anywhere from half marathon effort to marathon effort, where athletes are going down real fast, but also in a controlled manner. We're not trying to set their heart rates are still going to go down, but as they adapt to that over time, we find that their heart rate response goes to background aerobic levels. So a really advanced athlete can run at what feels like marathon effort on downs, and their heart rates might be 140 to 145 once they get super experienced with the exact demands.
Okay. Okay, so I was focusing on your talk, so I didn't check the chat. So anybody can open his or her mic and ask questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's Thibaut. So thanks first, David, and thank you to all the speakers for all this interesting and very complimentary presentation. It was very nice. So my question is for you, David. So in one of your slides, you talk about gender, and right after you talk about mental state and risk-taking. And my question is there gender differences in risk-taking? In one of our studies, we observed in our runner that female were performing the downhill section at a lower speed compared to males. So in absolute, but also relative to the mean speed of their race. And we speculated that can be linked with the lower fatigability observed in female after the race. So it is something that you also observed, that you noticed in your runners, and it is something that you consider for your training. And yeah,
it's an absolutely fascinating point, and I think it's actually really interesting to think about. Maybe there's a pacing element here too that's involved, but that's one reason that we focus. Like that last slide that seemed like a throwaway on you're a downhill monster, like that's what you have to decide, is not because that's just kind of like my brand or whatever. It's because that acceptance of the commitment to it becomes such a key element. And so, I think the most fascinating element for me as a coach is when a pro road runner starts with me, or elite college road runner and track runner, and they always suck at downhills to start. I mean, occasionally there's an exception of a freak of nature that's just great at it, and I have to focus on their mental state, whether it's with me or with a psychologist, as it relates to downhills, because they start with these narratives that are really unproductive. So as it relates to gender, I mean, I think that there, at least in the United States, there are definitely societal like negative things in society that may push the average woman to be slightly less of a risk taker on downhills than the average man. But I think gender is just one thing, and I'm not exactly sure of what the hormonal mechanism would be. So it's something that we go to basics with every athlete and say, hey, if you want to be the best you can be, we have to make this choice right now, and we have to make it every day, and it's going to be really hard. Just keep talking to me about it.
Thank you.
So you're talking about taking risk, but there is a question from Marlene talking about skills, like reading the terrain. So my question is, which part is due to the will to take risk, and which part is due to the real skill? Because if you are the road runner, of course you don't have the skill, you don't know where you put your feet, etc., etc.
Yeah, great question. So that's where we come in with form. What we have articles that I've written before that are just tells them the exact form cues they should hopefully use, which for us is just quick feet, where they center their eyes, and how they hold their body. And then we say, do it a lot. Keep practicing, because so much of this this part of this sport, downhill running, is so much more like soccer or basketball or another skill-based sport, in the sense is like, if you want to be Steph Curry shooting 3-pointers or Cristiano Ronaldo shooting free kicks, there's hundreds of thousands, there's millions of shots behind that. And for us, it's similar. You need to spend the time out there, within reason and get better at it. So we can't all be Killian. We can't all be born this way where we're on the mountains from a young age. But in practicing it, you just need to make sure you're practicing the right things. And so while that looks a little bit different for everyone, we're like, quick strides, flow over those trails, and if they need another cue, we'll send them videos of runners, whether it's Hannah Lafleur or ideally Killian or Emily Forsberg or someone like that, because it becomes so much more intuitive when you're like, oh, that's how it could be done, rather than jumping from foot to foot in a more hesitant manner.
Does it include other sports such as mountain biking, downhill mountain biking, or alpine skiing? Do you think it helps?
Oh my God, yeah. If I coach a skier or a mountain biker, I am like, I don't have to worry about this at all. I just need to make sure they have the training they need. One woman in particular is, her name's Alison Baca. She was a professional cyclist, and she came over to running and immediately set every record on every downhill in Boulder, which is, if you've ever, seen Boulder running, it's like remarkable to do because there's people like Claire that are the best in the world. So there's definitely crossover skill learning in downhills.
I think there is a question from Paul. It's a question and a comment. So Paul, would you like to open your mic and maybe you want to comment on that? Because I think this is related to what we just talked about.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just a quick one, David, on basically how do you increase confidence in runners? How do you get them to learn the technical skills? In my question, I put here in north of England, we do a lot of fell running, which is super technical and super steep, so take care of itself. But when I go to ultras, I don't know, probably a mid-pack to back of the field, but then on the descents, I make up a lot of time. So it just seems like everyone has this sort of confidence issue in the fact that nobody wants to slip over.
Well, I think you're just a great athlete, Paul. It's a good problem to have. No, I mean, I think that's why we focus on it a lot, because there is an element that clearly this is a low hanging fruit. Like, you tell me someone's velocity at VO2 max needs to improve, and I'll be like, okay, give me 5 years, to get it where it needs to be. You tell me someone's downhills need to improve and can improve their race performances by a ton, and I'm like, wow, that's a huge opportunity that we might be able to seize in a year in the case of Tabor Hemming to become one of the best. So we don't do specific drills. That being said, I'm not sure if Jason Coop's still on the chat, but I saw that he was saying some of the drills he uses for athletes to actually use drills for this. So I imagine there is a drill-based things that coaches could use. And so Jason wants to speak up about that. You can, if not, if he's gone already. I think we just do repetition, but yeah, I think drills could have a good place too.
Okay. Fred, did you have a question? Fred?
Yeah, I do. But just another one came up that was related to what David was saying. It's like one thing that I have used in the past with other people is like, in the same way that cyclists do motor pacing, like doing like another runner pacing. So like pacing someone down the hill and like basically going, like I have done it with people before, me being the fast runner in this case, not that I am amazingly fast, but like going a little faster than I know that they are comfortable, and I maybe do that for like a minute, and then like I slow down again, and then like repeating that. But basically, like, yeah, sort of like see how I flow, see the side of the trail that I take, stuff like that. Have you ever tried that?
That is that's a breakthrough for me that you say that, because some of the best downhill runners we coach, Claire, who's on the screen now, good example, or Kat Bradley, who won Western States in 2017. There's a Rocky Mountain Runners run here in Boulder, and they go down Amphitheater Trail, which is a 15% grade, very rocky trail, and they are essentially it's mixed gender, and some of the better downhill men are there, and they just run behind them, and over time they've become world-class descenders. So I think using that in a more intentional way is a incredible idea, and something that Megan and I are gonna start focusing on a lot more.
And then like my previous question was a little bit of I think Guy started this sort of type of question in the last seminar, was about European versus American, basically, because like I think that in North America in general we see many more of those like mule trails or like trails that are like not super steep, very long, very well taken care of. Like I have seen sometimes in the news that people have sued the like Forest Service or stuff like that because they have tripped on a trail. And I was just last weekend in the Alps, like hiking and thinking about this, like, yeah, like this would totally not pass for a trail in North America. I have done some hiking in North America as well. And it's like, I do have the feeling like of experiencing trails much more technical here in Europe, in the Pyrenees or the Alps compared to North America. Do you think that there's a different way to train for them? Because I guess that you can run faster, like in like your linear speed in those mule trails.
Yeah, so amazing question. The reason I went to this slide is because of this guy right here in the middle, Seth Ruling, who just won the Maxi 85K by like 40 minutes over in France. And so when I started coaching him, and I think our athletes have had a solid amount of success in Europe, and the idea is you cannot treat them similarly, right? Like Western states and UTMB are completely different strains on the body. And that goes with the World Mountain Championships, which we've had athletes win, or similar things to that. Like if you don't train for it specifically, you're going to be screwed when you get out there. It's just totally different stress. So what we really try to do is try to take control of some of the trails that people run. So we'll be like, we get much more active in suggesting routes. So for Seth here, those trails that I just mentioned, Amphitheater, Ranger Trail, these mountains here in Boulder that are very, very steep and approximate Europe more, we'll have them do 10 miles of their run. So, 16K of their run on trails like that. We won't have them do the whole thing because I think sometimes that just breaks people down over time. But we'll start to incorporate that more and more starting, let's see, go to this slide. So this is kind of the European slide. At least 4 weeks before, but ideally 8. So with Seth, it was about 4 weeks before. We started layering in this where he would do weekends that would have, let's say, like 5K vert, 5K meters vert. And basically you can't train for European trails on like prototypical American trails. Similarly, in Europe, you can't train for American trails in the same way too. So it becomes trying to balance what you have with what's ideal. And so, I think the steepness is the big factor though. It's why we have athletes run faster than race pace on downs and do steeper trails than they'll see on race day, because we can't simulate a 60K or 100K or 100-mile in training. So we need to make sure that the stresses we're providing are maybe 5 to 10% greater, particularly with the downhills, so that we don't just have an accumulation of stress that overwhelms their preparation for the repeated bout effect.
Cool. Yeah, I was thinking while you were speaking that on the oops, I'm just getting a phone call, sorry. That on the steeper trails, like for the to train in Europe for American style, you can always choose like fire roads and stuff like that, but it's more difficult to do it the opposite way, I guess. So yeah, that's why I was thinking, yeah, like how you would deal with that. So yeah, thank you.
I mean, I think to follow up though, this is now I'm stepping away from science, pure coaching theory. I think that one of the reasons Americans sometimes don't excel in Europe is because we overdo it when thinking about European trails. It's like, okay, we're not going to be as good as someone that's grown up since they were 12 on those specific trails at those specific skills, but we can be faster. And so I think often athletes that are going to train for a big race in Europe lose sight of the fact that, hey, if I show up to this start line and I'm a 2:12 marathon talent, then I can perform as well as them. But if I let my speed fall by the wayside fully and just spend 6 weeks going up and down in the San Juan Mountains or over in Chamonix and totally lose sight of that, then I'm trying to play their game. And so I want our athletes to, maintain their skill set and what works for them without, compromising like the things that make them, world-class athletes. And that doesn't just go for elite athletes. I think that also goes for, more recreational athletes. Like, keep developing your long-term skills, even as you do pulses of focus, like these specific training blocks.
Thank you.
I'm not sure why you're talking, Fred, about why you're comparing Europe and the US or North America, because you've been in Calgary and you know that it can be very technical, very steep in the Rocky Mountains. So, and even in France, if you compare the Pyrenees and the Alps, it's totally different, and it's both in Europe, of course. So, of course, the terrain matters, but I'm not sure this is US versus Europe.
No, but I think sometimes this is about the, like, I think my general feeling is that the steepness of the trails and the way in which the trails are built. So like if you run down like from Mount Whitney in California, or if you run down the Grand Canyon and you are used to running in the Alps, that's like a road. If you hike on the John Muir Trail in California, which are very steep mountains, but like the main trails, you feel that you're on the highway many times. Although I agree that in Calgary,
Okay,
in the
so
Rockies,
because I know more Canada than US, maybe this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
why. Maybe in the US is different then. It's always
So
different in the US.
To jump in with a personal, I try to leave out as many personal anecdotes as I can, but personal anecdote. I tried to train for the World Championships with Team USA from California, and used the steepest trails we had. Was fully unprepared. Like if I should have just made a training trip to Colorado or somewhere that actually has trails that can get closer to approximating it. Because even though I was doing some more vert, as Fred was saying, the trail construction was so different that when I mentioned Ludo passing me, I went from like third or fourth to basically last place, due to my ill preparation for the downhills. And that was way back in the day, but it was eye-opening to me. And I think European athletes are amazing. They're incredible, and seeing them in action is incredible. And I think the only way American athletes can beat them at their own game is to be really, really, really fast and do a little bit of it.
Okay, makes sense. All right. Okay, let me check the chat. Is there any last question? We're already longer than we said, but that's okay. Okay, so there is a question in the chat. If you want to read that, I think this is also for you, David. Feel free to ask a question to other speakers as well.
So talking about goal 4, is there any additional strategy combined to improve recovery? And what would a normal week distribution look like in terms of workouts? I mean, that's the complicated thing about downhills that we haven't really gotten into too much, is there's a high stress, high injury rate, and you need to be careful. So that's why what we're generally trying to do is spread it out. So weekend blocks and midweek perhaps for very steep races. And then the rest of your sessions will be so easy that you're going to recover. But very different things work for everyone. I mean, some coaches prefer to do like training camp style blocks. Others prefer much less vert. Like one of the things that I didn't mention is that the repeated bout effect studies have been used by some coaches to say, hey, you actually don't need that much of this. I mean, I think sometimes the real world results at races that are really steep disprove that, but it gets into the complications of translating research into training theory directly. And that's an amazing question though. And I think it's a constant battle, and it needs to be different for every athlete. Like Scotty Hawker, he was third at UTMB off like 50 miles per week. So 80K per week. Obviously that's abnormal. He's unique. He is an athlete that is not every athlete's going to respond like that. So you need to pay a lot of attention to individual response over time.
Jason, you are here, and there's a question for you. A good timing. Jason, can you see the question for you? So can you please describe the drills from the running camps that you mentioned?
Oh God, I don't know if this has any relevant points. I mean, in an effort of full disclosure, these are things that we've just hacked together from other sports like mountain biking and skiing. So the first one of which is we'll take a group of athletes to the top of a climb, kind of a more technical climb that has a lot of switchbacks. And we'll set out pin flags along the descent, and instruct 3 different colors of pin flags along the descent, and instruct them that they should always keep 3 of them in their field of vision. And as the session goes along, we kind of elongate the distances between each one of those pin flags in an effort to get their vision a little bit further down the trail. And this is kind of alluded to some of the VR discussion that was going on in the chat room. So that's the first thing that we do. And the second thing that we do is we teach them to glissade. A lot of people have never actually skied or have the ground move underneath them in any sort of context. And in a trail running application, sometimes that sensation is actually quite novel and tends to freak people out. And so what we do is we just take the beginners on an area where we can just do a simple standing rod glissade and just teach them that the movement underneath the movement of the trail underneath their feet is not something that they need to even be worried about. It's not something that they need to be scared about, and they can actually learn to work with it, so that the little times that, you know, they might either slightly roll an ankle or slightly catch a toe, or, you know, some sort of minor mishap on the trail doesn't become a major one, because that's one of the things that we notice in our camps with kind of some of the major injuries that happen, is they don't need to happen because it's usually a very minor misstep from a novice athlete that doesn't know how to course correct. And we just use that drill to teach a little bit of that course correction, and just the fact that the ground is not always going to be stable. So we lean on those two. Once again, I can't take a whole lot of credit for it, because just borrowing, stealing from other sports, as we all tend to do.
Thanks a lot, Jason. There's a question for you, Wouter, in the chat. Can you open and please answer if you're okay with that?
Sure. Yeah. So Remy asks why we not just use power instead of speed or pace during up and downhill to pace. Since I did mention that using the stride sensor was part of our study, and that's an interesting question. So generally, we can quantify mechanical work or mechanical power with sensors, but there's a big sort of disagreement between what mechanical work or mechanical power does as how it is reflected in metabolic power. So specifically, when we talk about downhill running, for example, there could be a lot of negative work. You're braking, and if you look at the level of the muscle and muscle physiology, actually, that doesn't necessarily cost a lot of energy, versus the concentric work does cost a lot more energy. And then the running motion specifically is extra interesting because we're bouncing a lot. So on the level, we would see a lot of mechanical energy fluctuation. So we do see a lot of instantaneous mechanical power, but a lot of that is just elastic energy being stored in the tendons and then released. And I'm not saying that that comes for free, because you need to have your muscles active to allow the tendon to do that. And that sort of is my short version of sort of pointing out that that is pretty much a can of worms that, in my perspective, the field is not ready to properly do, although that's why we did include the stride sensor, because they sort of acknowledged that. They started out purely on the mechanical power side and then realized, well, this is not reflected directly at metabolic energy costs. So they make tweaks to their algorithms, and some other companies might be doing the same. So it sort of all comes down to what is your best measure. And I think it's all, again, when we don't talk about technical or steep downhill, but really the runnable side of things, it comes down to a metabolic effort level. And I like to quantify that based on speeds and grades and try to know how that changes metabolic energy. Other people like to use other sensors and take some mechanical power into that, but we need to be careful because there's all the different brands with the different sensors and the different definitions, and they more or less would agree or not agree that it's not great. I think heart rate might sometimes even be better than purely just mechanical work. So that's unfortunate, but also a big challenge for our field. For cycling, it's a different story because most often you're just concentrically pedaling, so it works for uphill or downhill or wind resistance or not. For running, there's still a lot to find out how those things are related and how they are affected by grade.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so I think most people are now leaving, so I think we'll close the session now. Thank you again to the speakers, to all of you for attending. Of course, we'll post the replay. Fred will actually send an email to all the people that registered. And yes, so that was a great session as I expected. So definitely worth organizing, the time that we spent organizing that. So I hope you enjoyed it as well as we did, and talk to you in the future. Bye-bye. Take care.